Hello to everyone. We will start this conference right now. Dear citizens, dear guests, and dear colleagues, today is an important day for the future of European citizens and the whole world. After 3 years of hard censorship, I am very pleased that we have an opportunity to discuss the problems with World Health Organization in this Parliament. We want to start a public discussion and public action with our citizens. The World Health Organization is demanding that all countries surrender authority to declare pandemics and procure so-called vaccines into their hands. Unfortunately, today there are very few of products that we can truly call vaccines. Most of them are pharmaceutical products without any proven effectiveness that can be classified as vaccine. When we look at the donors of World Health Organization, the Gavi Alliance, also known as Vax Alliance, the Gates Foundation, Sanofi, and others, if we hand over the power to declare pandemics and procure vaccine to the World Health Organization, we can expect a rapid change from the rhythm of any epidemics every 2 years to a rhythm of 1 epidemic per month. We can expect a shift from the von der Leyen's current 11 doses of vaccine per each EU citizens to a very likely 60 to 90 doses per each person in European Union. We can almost certainly expect obligatory vaccination or even of unborn children. From their perspective in the future of the world, I believe that is a great danger for the world's population. In this way, we do not leave our destiny in the hands of the World Health Organization, but in the hands of these who control it, the owners of pharmaceutical mega companies. Cycles of new pandemic campaign and so-called vaccination are ideal for population control in every sense. In terms on repressive restriction, on freedom of movement, the right of work, freedom of speech, freedom of choice, on other fundamental rights, but also as a perfect tool for regulating the size of the world population in the future. For this reason, China's great affection for the World Health Organization is not surprising. To this day, China continues to censor its social media platform TikTok when negative discussion about the World Health Organization appear. They deleted my speech, which was viewed over 4 million times in just 1 day. Even the Facebook, the well-known leader in censorship, no longer force such censorship. If we want to avoid this highly probable dark scenario, we must make an effort to raise awareness as of many citizens as possible and prevent leaving the health and lives of citizens in the hands of private pharmaceutical companies, whose real owners are actually unknown. No one knows who is the real owner of pharmaceutical companies. We know that always BlackRock, Vanguard is owner of everything, but who is behind of BlackRock and Vanguard? Today, I was much softer than usual, but we must be aware that this problem requires the strongest possible resistance in Europe and even the whole world. Thank you for your attention, and I wish you a productive conference and the start of public initiative for better tomorrow of all of us. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Sorry, because I'm French and you know my accent it will be not so well. But first of all, I would like to thank Mislav Kolakušić and his team for organizing this event. My dear parliamentary colleagues, the international experts, and also Fredrik Balden. This is the man who is demanding the removal of the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, and is here, and we can applaud him. The management of the COVID crisis has been causing surprising decision-making at national, European, and global level for more than 2.5 years. Will the lack of transparency and active cooperation with Big Pharma have been the hallmark of our institution, which have not hesitated to flout our individual and collective freedoms in the name of the safety of all and the fight against the virus. It is to be feared that with an international treaty on pandemics, which is moreover legally binding, our member states will be dispossessed of their sovereignty in terms of health, and that aberrant and unfair measures, such as the suspension of unvaccinated caregivers, be perpetuated. Throughout the past year of the COVID Commission has met, the elements that will remain in our minds are also the repeated refusals of the main players to respond to our invitation, like WHO President Tedros was among those who refused to intervene. The COVID Commission was unable to summon her, like Mr. Bourla, the CEO of Pfizer, or Ursula von der Leyen. The 5th of June, the World Health Organization has announced that it will use the European Union Digital COVID Certificate to launch our global digital certification system thanks to a historic partnership to strengthen global health security, according to its director, which states that the future system should help facilitate mobility and protect citizens around the world against current and future threats to health, including pandemics. But who asked that? This global organization therefore tacitly validates the failure of the European Union in terms of management of the pandemic and vaccination policy, with a flagrant lack of transparency, conflicts of interest, and draconian measures linked to the health pass. Transferring this power to the WHO is tantamount to creating a sort of World Health government, dispossessed states of their sovereignty and further alienating citizens from decision makers. In this management of a pandemic, the state remains the best level to adapt its measures to real situation without falling into the ease of generalized draconian measures, such as confinement or prohibition of access to certain public places, which are not always justified. We are opposed to the establishment of this global governance, the tools of which will have significant consequences of the private lives of citizens who are increasingly subject to the draconian measures imposed by unelected technocrats in globalized structures. Thank you again to be there. Thank you, we need you, and because we're keeping this fight, and thank you again to be there.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much to all of you for being here. I have to tell you that 2 years and a few months ago, when we started to express our public concerns about the digital COVID certificate and the fact that our rights as individuals, as well as MEPs, were severely violated, we did not expect that our message is gonna travel all across the world multiple times. Because when we had the first press conference, a few hours later after we placed the conference online, we received hundreds, if not thousands, of emails every day from people, from elected officials, from non-governmental organizations, from judges, from prosecutors, from journalists, all of them telling us that they shared the same concerns as us, but they did not realize that there are some public voices from a high-level authority, I would say, to express or to share the same concerns as them. When we started that press conference and then all the activities that we've done together afterwards, we realized that actually people all across the world are hungry, are thirsty for freedom. They want their own officials to be accountable and to respond in front of the public. So the alternative that was presented to us with this pandemic, this was the best opportunity for some elites that are not elected by anybody, who are not accountable to anybody, to pretty much hijack, day by day, month by month, year by year, more and more of our rights, more and more of our assets, because we see that happening right now in many countries. You saw what happened in Canada, for example, when the truckers protested against Trudeau. He ordered that their bank accounts be blocked, and that happened. And at that point, we did not even have, they did not even have in Canada, the digital currency. Imagine what will happen when on your phone you will have the digital wallet, the digital currency, the digital vaccination certificate. So we saw what happened. And now just imagine in your worst case scenario what will happen if we allow the WHO to have so much power over our states, over our governments, our elected officials, and even over our judiciary. Because over the years, over the centuries, I would say, when the modern state was developed, we had the so-called separation of power in the state. You had what we have, the executive power, legislative power, and the judicial power. And the reason why the power was split among three different powers in the state was that the individual rights of every person be protected, be safeguarded. So in case the executive power or the legislative power is abusing your rights, you can go in front of the judicial power or the constitutional court to challenge a law or to challenge an administrative decision. Now imagine what would happen if all of this decisional power would be passed over to WHO. Can they stay in court? Can the head of WHO justify his decision, for example, to proclaim a pandemic across the world in front of a judge? Because they can't right now. So the biggest threat that we are facing right now is a threat to our national sovereignty, to the supremacy of our constitutions, and implicitly, unfortunately, to our fundamental rights. Because if all of these powers that were granted through our constitutions to our national institutions or authorities will be handed over to a global institution that is not accountable to anybody, who's led by people who are not elected by us as citizens, then we are done with our rights. Because they can easily just pass a decision, or whatever you want to call it, to declare a pandemic. Once that is declared, the governments can impose draconian restrictive measures, and you will not be able to challenge that. In Romania, for example, the country that I proudly represent here, during the pandemic, there was not an official document, an official act released, submitted by any Romanian governmental agencies to declare in Romania a pandemic. So there were people challenging the pandemic in court, and the government came and said, well, there's a press release from WHO, and based on that press release that says, well, as of tomorrow, there's going to be a pandemic, we behaved in a certain way. So imagine a press release played the role of implementing or calling something a pandemic. And we did not even have the treaty that they are talking about. So I'm glad that all of you are here today. I'm looking forward to sharing with all of us and with all the Europeans your insights. And I'm looking forward to working with you, not only to support all the initiatives that you have, but also to make people of Europe aware that in 2024, in the month of June, for the Europarliamentarian elections, they have a very clear option and choice to make: freedom or tyranny, democracy or lack of democracy, transparency or lack of transparency. And as I said at the beginning of our press conferences, the difference between democracy and tyranny is very simple. When you know everything about your government, that is democracy. When the government knows everything about you, that is tyranny. So let's fight together to maintain democracy in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, my dear colleagues, my dear guests. As always, this is one of our many events. I am very honored to be with you here today. And I get the impression that with every passing year, the WHO is becoming less and less about health and medical science and more about politics and lobbying. Less about health policies and more about selling and promoting certain products made by pharmaceutical companies, most notably vaccines. WHO has failed humanity in COVID crisis and must be held accountable. They have trampled on human rights and medical ethics and behaved more like public relation agency for those pharmaceutical companies. WHO is corrupt, and it is more corrupt the higher in hierarchy in the organization structure you go. Many of the employees, including top jobs, are linked to private interests following the principle of revolving doors. As you know, WHO is heavily dependent on private donors, such as Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Bloomberg Foundation, and Rockefeller Foundation. And of course, WHO is also dependent on big pharmaceutical companies that have a seat on governance board of Gavi. Gavi is another top financial contributor to WHO. Their contribution, the private contributors, and their influence shadows hundreds of member countries, especially the ones in Africa, Asia, and South America. Also, since we are in European Parliament, one of the top financial contributors to the WHO is European Commission, the so-called government of European Union. The behavior of this European Commission in COVID crisis can be described as corruption, incompetence, and disaster. Can you imagine that the one person who arranged everything with Pfizer and also other pharmaceutical companies, Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the Commission, was protected by her political group and never came to a committee hearing to answer some very important questions, questions that deal with billions of euros and hundreds of millions of citizens. No, she never came to that hearing. She avoided it. But then they said, all right, there won't be any hearing in the COVID committee, the special committee. We'll make our own hearing in the bureau, in the presidency of the parliament. But in the end, not even that happened. Not even this tiny piece of smoked and mirrored transparency happened. So not even this event that was supposed to happen behind closed door ever happened. Is this democracy? Is this transparency? It is not. It is not. And the final report of the COVID committee even failed to report in a proper way on this first step of problems that we had during COVID crisis, and this is transparency. Even on that first step, it failed to deliver. This pandemic treaty that we speak of is nothing more than an attempt by WHO to get more power, more control, and more money. They want to take health policy from sovereign nations to a centralized body, globalist, bureaucratic body, technocratic body. That's not what we want. That's not what I want. This is not why I'm here. I want these policies to remain and to be made at home in our national institutions. I fully support the European Citizens' Initiative, freedom and trust. due to its democratic, legal, and awareness-raising implications. And finally, we must not give up our sovereignty to non-elected, highly corrupt, criminal, private international organization that acts solely for financial gain with every passing year. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming today. And thank you, Mislav, for really putting in the work and making this happening today. And I really will have to say, I am so very honored to be here with 7 very brave citizens who came here today to launch an initiative for a European Citizens Initiative, an initiative which will hopefully be accepted by the EU Commission, although I don't really hold my breath, to be quite frank, but I seriously hope we will be able to do that. These 7 citizens are so incredibly brave because they stand up against this despicable attempts by the globalitarian misanthropists to strip us of freedom, democracy, and the rule of law. They simply say no to the attempts of granting an unelected body governing powers. They simply say no. And that's what we all should do, because this will end if we simply say no. And that's what we're here to do today. Because an unelected body like WHO, who is controlled and run by multi-billionaires, should never be allowed to act in place of a democratically elected government. Never, ever. In democracies, ladies and gentlemen, it is government of the people, by the people, for the people. And any government of anywhere in the world who disregards this fundamental principle of democracy by supporting this unprecedented power grab by WHO is an anti-democrat demonstrating nothing but his utter contempt for the people. And these 7 brave citizens, they will not stand for this, and neither will we. I will expose anyone, whether it's a member of a government in a member state or a government around the world, or a member of parliament in the European member states or parliaments around the world, who do not respect the people and do not respect democracy. I will see to it they will be exposed. Each and every one of them, by name. Because guess what? There's elections coming up, and the people might be interested in who is responsible for the abolition of democracy. So we are here today to tell you, WHO globalitarian misanthropists, we are here today to tell you, you picked this fight, you wanted this fight. Well, guess what? You've got it. Let's fight. Because these brave citizens, my colleagues and I, we will not tire to fight you every step of the way. These brave 7 citizens and millions more around the world, these are the people you will have to reckon with from now on, because we are millions around the world. It is you that is the small fringe minority. You are the ones who do not have the right to dictate to the people what they want and what they don't want. So, take it from me, take it from us, take it from these 7 citizens who gathered here today. Take it from the millions and millions of people around the world. we will bring you down, and we will not tire until we have done just that. So brace yourselves. We are here, and the fight is on. So let's have the fight. Let's commence with the fights. Why don't we? Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Before I introduce the 7 citizens that will speak to you today, I will first introduce one of our lawyers who is working with us on the initiative, Philipp Kruse, who will speak for a short while, and then Mattias Desmet, who also is one of our citizens within the initiative, but will also speak as an expert on this panel.
Thank you, Justyna, and thank you very much to the MEPs for inviting us to this great presentation of this European Citizens Initiative. It's a privilege to be here and to assist this project, and I shall not start without thanking the 7 European citizens that had this brave idea to start this European Citizen Initiative. Thank you very much. I guess this is the first time that European citizens, under the time of Corona, took this step and this possibility to bring back democracy and to bring back debate about this important topic into the European Parliament after the brave attempts and all the initiatives that have been done already by those members of Parliament that have opened the session. And now I have the privilege to briefly summarize the situation from a legal point of view. Why are we here? Because we all experienced since early 2020 an unprecedented excess and abuse of power of governments at the same time all over the world. They did what they did under the leadership of the World Health Organization under the pretext of a perpetuated war against a virus. Almost all countries in Europe participated. And they participated in a perpetuated pandemic regime of restrictions ever and ever extended, but never proven by scientific methods. Scientific best practice standards and fundamental human rights were totally put aside. Freedom of movement, self-determination, bodily autonomy, free speech, free information, economic freedoms, and most sadly, human dignity. No chance for a defense against this excess of power. No effective judicial control. I had to experience that with many of my fellow lawyers in the past 3 years. Every case anew, we had the hope to actually make the judges consider the legally relevant facts, but we failed. In none of the many court cases, judges were willing to listen. Now, and even no parliament in Europe until these days called its government back to reason, back to normal, even until these days. And what otherwise would be considered the normal thing to do, a global basic standard of quality management, meaning a serious reassessment in order to learn from the past for the future, that seems doesn't to exist anymore under WHO's COVID pandemic. And under this regime, millions of people and also the economy suffered from useless and harmful countermeasures. People were forced into millions of days of quarantine, isolation, masks, regular testing, restriction, and so on and so on. Even children had to do and to suffer all of this. But most significantly, experimental substances were pushed under people's skin. And just thanks to the most powerful marketing campaign ever promoted in history by governments and health authorities, with the slogan, "No one is safe until everybody is vaccinated," the public was made believe that there is no alternative and that these new technology-based vaccines were highly effective and safe. The public was misled, and the results can today be seen. Now, this is the most dangerous aspect in the past 3 years. It was the violation of the integrity of our body, our right of self-determination to make our own choice regarding what kind of medication we want to apply. And we want to do it based on accurate and correct information. And this is why we are here today. There was no protection of this most personal and most vulnerable aspect of our life in the past, and there will be no in the future if we don't act today. Even less protection, because now the WHO is about to finalize its ultimate extension of power, and instead of looking back and correcting the errors and give back the power of give back power to free competition of science, they continue with even a stricter power grab. And the European Commission has established a series of regulations and even a small agency, pandemic agency called HERA, as the junior partner of WHO. And just recently, some weeks ago, we have learned about the digital COVID certificates. Now, today, these brave 7 European citizens from 7 different EU countries have decided to take action with this instrument of the European Citizens' Initiative. This initiative allows EU citizens to directly participate in EU legislation and in policy making. And under such an initiative, European citizens can invite the European Commission to take action in areas where the Commission has the power to legislate. Now, with this ECI, the abbreviation, these brave European citizens do request the Commission to adopt a comprehensive set of legal acts that recognize and strengthen the protection of individual sovereignty and responsibility for all decisions that impact individuals and their children, including medical choices. These principles are grounded in the fundamental rights of human dignity and integrity in many different conventions, among others, not only in the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European People. Article 3 reads, "Everyone has the right to respect for his and her physical and mental integrity in the fields of medicine and biological. The following must be respected, in particular, the free and informed consent." And free and informed consent means that it's based on true and accurate information. And there are many other conventions. I spare you with the list, but just as a small hint, the United Nations has issued a series of relevant, supportive, and very important conventions. But one is of particular importance in this respect, and this is the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, concluded in 1966, because in its Article 7, it says no one shall be subjected without his free consent to medical and scientific experimentation, and this even applies in times of public emergency which threatens the life of the nation and the existence of which is officially proclaimed. So this is mandatory international law and must be respected and shall be put into this initiative as a driving factor. Now, this is a small first step, but it is an important one. And it will be a first important step to defend our right of self-determination and to say no to every power that ignores personal integrity, and to defend the right to decide what we want to have in our body and in the body of our children. It shall be also seen as a start of a wider campaign across Europe and the world to finally establish and foster public debate and public awareness of the ever more restrictive, authoritarian, and totally anti-democratic global development of WHO. Together, we will restore democracy. We will bring back human rights and human dignity to our countries and bring those who tried to abolish all of these principles and values to justice. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mattias Desmet. Do you hear me like that?
Yes.
Okay.
Maybe a little bit closer.
Louder. Okay, I will try to speak louder. I'm Mattias Desmet. I'm a professor of clinical psychology at Ghent University. I also hold a master degree in statistics, and I lecture also on psychological processes and group dynamics in our culture and society. And in the latter context, I published a book about 1.5 years ago, which was titled The Psychology of Totalitarianism. And in that book, I argued that we really are at risk in our society to lapse from a democratic system into a new kind of totalitarianism, a kind of technocratic new totalitarianism. And I think that, for instance, the new treaty of the WHO is a major leap forward in this direction. It's a major leap forward in the direction of a society in which global institutions unilaterally and top-down impose their policy, for instance, their health policy, to society and to the population. For me, the strange thing in all this, or one of the strange things in all this, is that these institutions represent themselves as if they are the summum, the ultimate products of the tradition of the Enlightenment. And I wonder whether they still remember how the tradition of Enlightenment started, whether they still know the seminal texts that were at the beginning of the tradition of Enlightenment. For instance, the texts of people like Voltaire and Kant. I would like to read together with them Kant's text on, which was titled What is Enlightenment? In this text, Kant argues that the ultimate goal of the tradition of Enlightenment should always be to create a citizen that is capable of thinking of himself and that dares to speak out his thoughts in public space. And Kant even mentions in the second paragraph, I think it can be the third one, he even mentions that such a citizen doesn't accept a teacher who tells him what is right or wrong. He doesn't accept a priest that tells him what is good and evil. And he also doesn't accept a doctor that tells him what is healthy and what is not healthy. So that's what Kant had in mind. The tradition of the Enlightenment should produce citizens that dare to speak out in public space and that think for themselves. Sapere audet, think for yourself. And I think that, in my opinion, well, we cannot move more in the other direction than accepting that institutions such as the WHO, top-down, indeed, impose and tell us what medical treatments we should undergo. It's not in the spirit of the Enlightenment to do so, and in the end, maybe the WHO thinks that they do not so much represent the tradition of Enlightenment, but rather rationality or even science. Well, I think also from a rational point of view, it simply doesn't make sense to impose medical treatments to a population. I can summon numerous reasons why it is irrational and not scientific to do so, but I will only mention one. All researchers that have investigated the efficacy of medical treatments throughout the last 100 years have concluded that the lion's share of the efficacy of a treatment is due to the so-called placebo effect, often up to 80%. Up to 80%. So meaning that it's the subjective attitude of someone towards the medical treatment he uses that will determine to a large extent whether the treatment is efficacious or not. And if you impose a treatment to someone who doesn't want it, that means that you never can say that you do it for the health of the person. Never. It just doesn't make sense. I could sum numerous other arguments just to show that what is happening now in this world, this evolution towards a technocratic society, is neither in the spirit of the Enlightenment and is definitely not rational or scientific. It's irrational, absurd, and unscientific, and against the tradition of the Enlightenment. So I think that is one of the main reasons why I'm here and why I support the European Citizen Initiative, and also why I'm grateful towards the MEPs that made it possible for us to speak here. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Justyna Walker, and I am here today as a Polish citizen and one of the 7 European citizens to introduce to you this European Citizens Initiative project that we have been working on. Over the last 3 years, we as individuals and collectively as citizens watched our governments and our representatives very closely. We voiced our opinions, we've marched the streets to be heard, and we made every effort to create a dialogue. However, as we stand here today, we realize that the world in which the citizen's opinion and citizen's voice as primary factor in making decisions is slipping away. We have seen non-governmental entities injecting themselves into our health, into our homes, into our privacy, and into our wealth. This is not what we as people want, and this is not what we as people need. The reason we choose to give our vote or our backing to our representatives in any capacity is because we do not want the unelected, self-proclaimed leaders to decide on our behalf. This includes negotiating with private, non-transparent organizations such as WHO, and in the process ignoring objections of the citizens. We as people not only choose, we put our trust in you, and the trust has been broken. Today, what we see is these unelected, disconnected from the average man or a woman's view technocrats pushing their vision of the world on us and being helped to do so by our own representatives. There have been many petitions, there have been many declarations, and many of us have come together on European and global level to say no to this power grab that we are seeing currently. With implementation of such tools as international health amendments and WHO treaty, both to be introduced in European countries and beyond in May 2024, we are facing further push from these unelected, self-appointed organizations and individuals who want to make decisions about our freedom of choice. And so with loss of trust in our government and the institutions, with growing craving of these unelected entities to curb our freedoms, we as citizens decided to use the ECI, which is the European Citizens Initiative, as a tool to be publicly recognized and finally heard. European Citizens Initiative, as my colleague Philipp has said prior, was introduced with the Treaty of Lisbon in 2007. It was inspired by Switzerland and its existing direct democracy tools. It aims at increasing direct democracy by allowing EU citizens to participate in development of EU policies. Nowadays, we are hearing more frequently that the European Parliament and the European Commission see the disconnect between the people and the institutions, and yet they proceed to listen to these self-elected representatives, such as Director General of the WHO or head of a non-profit organization such as World Economic Forum. This continuous curbing of freedom and loss of trust is the reason why we want to introduce the Trust and Freedom Initiative. Thanks to the tremendous work of our team, that includes not only doctors, lawyers, activists, but also us as mothers and fathers, people from different walks of life, we will be putting forward our ECI, the European Citizens Initiative, to the European Commission within the coming weeks. And we are asking all citizens of Europe, when this happens, to sign it electronically if possible in your country, or by finding or contacting us to create an event in your community to collect signatures. This is the opportunity for your voice to be heard, your voice as an individual and your voice as a collective, so that these grand halls and chambers of European institutions where the lobbyists negotiate their private agendas to the detriment of all of us, not only echo somewhere there in the distance, but reverberate loud our objections, starting here in Brussels. Within the next months, we aim to collect 1 million signatures across Europe to show our unity. With a team of lawyers, the Trust and Freedom Initiative is being prepared, and all information will be available here in Europe, but also globally via our social media and website. What we need is to adopt a comprehensive set of legal acts that recognizes and strengthens the protection of every individual citizen, every man, every woman, every child. I want to thank the MEPs for standing with us and supporting our effort. I also want to say that the success of the initiative can only be achieved together by all of us here in Europe, no matter who we are and where we come from. What we need is trust and freedom, and both cannot be dictated by few nor ignored by those who we choose to represent us. Because freedom is for no man to take, and trust needs to be earned, not bought. Thank you. And with that said, I'm going to hand over again to my colleague Mattias just to say why he is a part of the ECI with us.
Yes. Well, I'm here in the first place because, well, from the beginning of the Corona crisis, okay, I'll try to speak louder or bend forward a little bit. Yes. So from the beginning of the Corona crisis, I started to speak out because I had the feeling that if I didn't speak out now, I should never speak out again in my life. And that's exactly what I think your initiative intends to do. It's allowing citizens to speak out. In my situation, I was speaking out in the first place as a professor in psychology who noticed that there were very strange things going on in our society. And I noticed how most people, maybe up to 70%, bought into a narrative that in so many respects was utterly absurd and blatantly wrong. And I just noticed how people in one way or another seem to lack all capacity to take a critical distance of the narrative that was seizing power in society. And at the same time, so I noticed, for instance, that this narrative dramatically overrated the dangerousness of the virus immediately. I immediately noticed that. I noticed that probably by the mortality of the virus was overrated with a percentage of about 1,000%. I think it was rated 10 times more mortal than it actually was, and also people seem to be blind collectively for the collateral damage of the measures. And that for me was the moment when I decided to try to bring to people's attention what psychological processes could have been happening there. And I of course, as many people know, I understood what was happening in terms of a collective mass formation and an emerging totalitarianism. And At the same time, as I was thinking about the phenomenon, I noticed that the historical examples of similar situations in which mass formations emerged all showed that the only thing we can do about such a situation, about such a collective, a group dynamic where people become collectively blind and start to become extremely intolerant for people who think differently, that the only thing you can do about this is continuing to speak out. And I think that's something we have to be aware of. If we don't want things to get much worse, then we will have to find the courage, each and every one of us in its own way, to speak out and to articulate our opinion when it goes against the dominant discourse. So that's why I'm here and that's why I support this initiative.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Maria Hubmer-Mogg. I'm a medical doctor and mother from Austria. And over the past years, I became an activist. Lockdowns for the unvaccinated and mandatory vaccination in my home country showed me how fast steps can be set by the people in power. I want to express my heartfelt gratitude to the MEPs for their bravery and for taking a stand against the draconian measures over the past years. And I want to thank my fellow colleagues here that bring in the initiative. I want to thank today's speakers. All these messages should set a clear sign throughout the world that a change towards a brighter future is definitely possible if we unite in our efforts. The Great Awakening is happening worldwide. And yes, I also refer to a film here that had its premiere recently, showing in-depth knowledge of some of today's speakers. Over the last years, I've been in contact with so many different people in various organizations worldwide. It is clear that it is within human nature that we cannot always be of the same opinion in details, and we do not have to. But we can be so immensely strong if we find the smallest common denominator as a basis of incredible, effective work. I urge people to open their eyes to the potential threat and the future harms to our lives and liberties. I want to encourage all people of all different walks of life to stand with us, to sign the European Citizen Initiative once set free for the signature process, if you are from a European member state, or to start similar action on your own continent. Furthermore, I kindly ask our fellow human beings from around the world to join efforts to expose the power grab from entities which are not elected by the citizens and who are definitely not working for the greater good of the people. I encourage people to step outside the process of mass psychosis into a state of individual resilience that automatically will lead into a big, resilient crowd. Here we go. Reach out to your regional communities and politicians. Make them aware of what is happening. The ECI will help to encourage people to take action. We are many, and we will be so many more soon. I want to bring up a quote by J. Edward Griffin. He said that any change in history has been made by the 10 to 15%. We are, by now, way more already. We have reached the critical mass. People from all walks of life are invited to join forces because Now is the time for the inspirers of change, the planters of seeds and the bringers of truth, for the independent media that has the courage to break through, for the filmmakers that reveal the lies to free our minds, for the singer-songwriters and poets to write and sing of freedom and liberty, for the artists to create a new picture of the world, for the scholars of law who uphold honesty and integrity, for the wisdom of the healers, teachers and guides who remind us that the truth is inside if we only look and see. Now is the time to see that the light is more powerful than the darkness could ever be, and nurture our resilience deep within. Independent media is a key factor and so important. Thank you to all media outlets. Thank you to the independent media for spreading crucial information and to report on today's initiation event. I also want to remind us all that yesterday, on July 3rd, was Julian Assange's birthday. We send Julian our best wishes, and I want to quote Goethe, who said, "The living should hope." We need to raise the volume on the sound of freedom in so many areas. I want to end my speech with the invitation to every person out there to watch out for a film that is based on a true story with this exact title, The Sound of Freedom, that has its premiere today on July 4th. And please save the date. We warmly invite people from all over Europe and from throughout the world to come to our Europe for Trust and Freedom rally to the city of Vienna in Austria on October 1st, 2023. It will be wonderful to experience the feeling of unity at such a big in-person live event. And you will find further information on our webpage, the euci.info. Thank you so much.
Is among all options the World Health Organization an organization we should trust? Yet the WHO has no democratic legitimacy, nor are there any independent supervisory boards to effectively monitor the organization's work. And now a legally binding international pandemic treaty, really? I'm the father of 4 children. I have been a lawyer for 28 years now, and I'm involved as an advocate for fundamental rights and democracy with the German Lawyers Association, Lawyers for Enlightenment. And since the last weekend, also a member of the International Association of Lawyers for Human Rights, which we have founded is exactly last weekend in Cologne to unite all critical thinking lawyers worldwide who still care about human rights. With that background, and also with the background that I'm a journalist and also a book author, I have written a book, Corona State, in which I retell the events surrounding Corona from a German perspective and classify them from a legal point of view. With that background, the goals of the treaty scare me. They do not reassure me. Early detection and prevention of pandemics means, I fear, the establishment of a global early warning and surveillance system. Establishing and strengthening the WHO as the coordinating authority for global health issues probably has the practical effect of disempowering national and local health authorities, and this fundamentally contradicts the principle of subsidiarity. Why call for an international regulation when a problem can be solved just as well or even better nationally or locally? Strengthening of international cooperation in areas such as surveillance, warnings and response, probably means the establishment of a global surveillance system of citizens by the states, enforced by the WHO. And this amounts to a complete control and foreign domination and measurements, such as restrictions of the freedom to travel, the right of residence, freedom of movement, and all of them would probably be very easy to implement under those circumstances. In my opinion, the worldwide fight against false information would ultimately mean nothing other than the introduction of censorship at the discretion of the World Health Organization. All four goals would lead to a global surveillance and paternalism system of the World Health Organization. In the past corona pandemic, for example, the WHO showed through a global failure that it was at no time able to assess the situation correctly. The transfer of power to an anonymous, non-democratically legitimized organization with mafia-like structures, which is supplied from dubious sources of money and is close to the pharmaceutical lobby, to put it mildly, and which in future is to determine uncontrollably when a pandemic has broken out, when it is over, and how people worldwide are then to behave, is to be decisively rejected. The whole thing is made even more dramatic by the fact that governments, like the German government, are now linking the pandemic treaty issue with the second issue, climate change. Those who argue in this way obviously want the World Health Organization to be able to declare health crisis at its discretion and send people into further lockdowns or other measures as needed. But I do not want an anonymous world organization to decide for me, and certainly not for my children. I don't want anyone like those organizations to decide in future how to behave, how I have to behave in a crisis that may once again not be a real one, but only a man-made one. Jurists like me reject ideologies and totalitarian movements with a claim to absoluteness. I reject that an abstract construct of a public health is declared the global goal for all, whereas personal health has to take a backseat. Decisions on how to deal with health and illness must always be made by the individual and must not be shifted to the international level and an opaque network of organizations and responsibilities. I reject the idea that in the future not only actual diseases but a mix of data analysis, computer models, artificial intelligence, and test results should justify risk assessment at the discretion of the World Health Organization. If the treaty plans outlined were to be realized, decisions on how a society should deal with diseases, prevention, and epidemics, and that could be any wave of influenza, would be removed from the democratic process in many ways. The leverage of an impending public climate or public health emergency can be used without any barrier to monitor and control populations. According to this logic, the monitoring must take place permanently, because otherwise, according to this logic, it is not possible to recognize at an early stage when a state of emergency is imminent. I reject this. I also reject the fact that every person is considered a potential danger as long as she or he has not proven his harmlessness. None of this describes a world I want to live in. It's not the picture of a world I want to pass on to my children. Therefore, it's a clear no to a totalitarian world government engineered by WHO. Thank you.
Hi, I'm known as Vicky Ketion from Portugal. My name is Isabel, and several names that never end, so I'm not going to tell them all. We, the Portuguese, like lots of names. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to deeply thank the members of the European Parliament that invite us to support the European Citizens Initiative. It is with my great gratitude and heart that I will say, in behalf of the Portuguese people, thank you very much for this opportunity, and for our Lusitan souls finally are represented here in this Parliament, the Portuguese soul. Sam, thank you very much. We have never, thank you. Maybe I'll start crying in the middle, we never know, you know. We have never experienced a moment as in the last 3 years. People are afraid to say what they stand for, afraid to say what they are thinking. The suppression of dissident voices has and is well calculated. Move across the mainstream through censorship, disqualification of truth, repeating daily false reports of virus, death, war, climb, and now about a simple fact of biology, gender. At the beginning of 2020, thousands of scientists, doctors, health professionals were silenced. Accounts and holders of sovereign bodies in many countries were censored. Hundreds of thousands of posts were deleted. Out from brainwashing, censorship, and condition of all kinds of freedom movements. The neurolinguistic method used by repeating a narrative succeeds in frightening most people into an unspeakable obedience. Now they are using it again. In Portugal, as well in many other countries, access to health, medical treatments, consultation, diagnosis, and surgery have been cancelled. The consequences of these measures are too serious to be ignored here or all over the world. And these consequences will last for several years yet to come. The loss of many lives, and that has a name: genocide. It's very evident that the world is the victim of someone that holds the power and the puppets with no empathy whatsoever for anyone. The imposition of the respective certificates has never been less than an insult to our intelligence and freedom. The pushback, the same certificate will deprive us all for the beginning and the principal pillars of sovereignty and freedom. Make no mistake, all of this due to National Socialist left, extreme left, and many others disguised as something else policies, but all in collusion for the implementation of extreme poverty in Europe countries. They are creating the foundation of frightening regimes where values are inverted. The invasion of our lives, the control of our money, impeding the growth of our quality of life is our reality now. The state exists today to destroy, punish, persecute, and expropriate us from everything, even our soul. And suicide increases because of despair. Somewhere, at some point, the values became inverted, and life means nothing to these people. About my country, Portugal, the Portugal people, I'm sorry. I told you I'll start crying. Each time I talk about my country, the Portuguese people are being strangled by taxes and more taxes and terrible decisions to end the opportunity of work and growth. Maternity wards and pediatric wards are closed. Our cities are full of homeless people. Too many lost their houses to banks that double their raise interest too soon with no warrant. I wonder, what are the Portuguese parliamentarians doing here in this house, what they are doing about this and so much more I will have to say. This European formula is not working for us anymore. It is time for the European Union to recognize that we are on the brink, on the end of the European social project. It doesn't exist. What exists now does not represent European people, where they are almost no European at all. That's one other reason, amongst many other reasons, that people, as well this Parliament, must support the European Citizens' Initiative in order to become truly a project to safeguard us and not to destroy and exclude us from our homeland and safety. The solution is to work with us and not against us, so this Parliament become our European home again. Finally, we don't ask, we legitimately demand that these rights, the rights of children, must be respected in the first place, and that is whole doctrine of sexualization with a clear path towards the normalization of pedophile ends right now. May this institution emanate with dignity that respect for the innocents and for all families without any distinction of orientation. Family is family, no matter what, as long as they defend and preserve the dignity, respect, and safety of a child. I know that because I'm the mother of 5 and grandmother of 7. Children do not belong to the state or any organization whatsoever. Our human rights are inalienable, just like our freedom, and we do not recognize the WHO legitimacy to decide strictly anything about our lives. The World Health Organization aims for countries to surrender their sovereignty. But let me say this very clear. No one has the authority to hand over the sovereignty of a people to a third party without clear information and total consent. And if they do so by changing or overstep our constitution, it will be high treason to homeland. And this is the most important reason for every country, every single person, support, enjoy the European Citizens' Initiative. So together we live a legacy of truth, democracy, security, and freedom for the future of humanity. Today, with the strength of this initiative and your strength, your example, the parliamentarians that invite us here and support us through all these years, these 3 years, may the world and Portugal listen to these words and support our initiative. And for my fellow resilience and resistance people in Portugal, I will always end like we always do. People like all of us, we never, never give up. Thank you very much for having me and listening to me. Thank you. Obrigada.
So, hello friends. I was expecting that there will be more members of European Parliament, so my speech is made a little bit for them. Unfortunately, only the brave ones are here. And let me start with saying thank you very much for your job for the last years, what you are doing. That's the first. Thank you. Thank you especially to Mr. Kolakušić, who invited us, and to Christine Andersen, who supported the initiative with very strong words. So thank you also to Justyna Walker, who started the initiative, and because of her, we are here. So my name is Ladoslav Vrabel. I come from Czech Republic, and I wrote my speech because English is not my native language. I came here from a country where people are arrested, sent to the court, and punished for their political views, where the state is censoring private media and its own citizens. I myself have been illegally arrested and sentenced for my political views. You can read on the Home Office website that the government is paying communication experts and psychologists for strategies to prevent political ideas of activists from reaching the public. People in my country are forbidden to obtain information, are manipulated by the omnipresent propaganda, and are afraid to speak their minds. The trend is not improving. On the contrary, the European Parliament is preparing new laws to control the content on social media. That means, and I'm not now talking to you particularly, but those members who are not here, that means you are about to silence the people who gave you the voice. And even more than this, you are handing over this power to a largely privately founded and controlled organization, the WHO. So, tell me, honorable members, why we voted you to forbid us from getting information, to censor the public discussion, to hand over the power of decision to a rich private investors. Look, Bill Gates is a person like me, like you, or like my colleagues here. If we assume living in a democracy, I mean, Bill has the same rights and responsibilities under the law as any other person, right? We know that. People didn't elect him to make laws for them. So if you transfer the right to make decisions, which you got by the people electing you, to private investors, you have destroyed parliamentary democracy. And if you allow these landlords to tell us when we can and cannot leave the house, when we can cross city or state borders, or what we, the people, can and cannot say, you have turned our democracy into a new version of feudalism, because they are landlords. So let's wake up from this terrible dream. Freedom of speech cannot be limited without being lost. So let's speak openly, publicly, loudly, and free. I would like to comment what Mattias Desmet, the hero, said in the beginning, because he is the example. He is the one who convinced me to continue to speaking. Even I was arrested, sentenced by the court, and prosecuted, because we really have to keep speaking. This is when the totalitarian is coming, when the people are afraid, they are counting on us that we will be speaking. There are many bright people here I met, amazing people from all the world, and thank you all that you are speaking. I think this is the major thing what we have to keep, speaking openly and freely. So let's go back to the freedom, power to the people. I'm not sure if we win, but let's give it a chance. All people for freedom together. Thank you very much.
Thank you for invitation and this initiative to become true. Ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor for me to present Bulgaria. I'm a medical doctor. My name is Dr. Georgi Todorov, and I'm a physician, one of many activists in Bulgaria who exposed this plan of pandemic. I gladly accept the invitation of my fellow citizens to participate, and I believe that we're going to make true successfully. But what I want to say is that I have to remind you the doctors was participated very much. And I have to remind you that there is no regime holds in power without the help of medical doctor societies in the countries. Pinochet had them in his side and stood over 18 years. You shouldn't remember. We shouldn't forget. Many people have been reassured and believe that everything is behind us. It's undelusive, fake reception. I want to remind how everything has started. until the late 1990s, WHO achieved successes. I said this because me, myself, participated in projects in Republic of Ghana many times for many years. My personal encounter with the organization convinced me that it is undergoing a transformation of turning from a health-focused entity into something else that does not prioritize public health care anymore. I have to tell you that our society, if we think deeply, is guided by definitions. And those who have the power to change these definitions, their meanings are the ones who actually govern it. The WHO has appropriated the right to change the definition of epidemic, vaccines, etc., but not in the name of science, rather to fulfill the orders given by sponsors. We shouldn't forget that 84% of total revenue exceeding $3.6 million come from top 10 top donors are 72%. Let's see what they change. They easily remove words enormous numbers of deaths from the definition, replace it with public health emergency international concerns. An extraordinary event is determined to constitute a public health risk to other states through international spread of disease and potentially requires coordinated international response. This slight change took the pandemic from the medical field and turned it into a political act. They tried to do so in 2009, declared pandemic as swine flu. The governments were pushed and squeezed to make extra budget expenses, later turned the expenses in vain, and the purchased medicines became trash. Failing then, the next attempt through volatile public health emergency of international concern declared in January 2010 turned to be COVID epidemic only 41 days later. This act as the biggest achievement of the purposes of WHO. And they untied the hands of governments to restrict us in many ways, wearing masks, mandatory contract restrictions, limitation of public places, lockdowns, etc. And the doctors, most of the doctors helped them and help. The beneficiaries of this change were vaccine manufacturers, government that gained more power over citizens, and the right to spend money in shadow environment to the benefit of entities with endless greed. So, changing the definitions, the same happened in the United States with the vaccines. And the words, the vaccines protects a person from the disease was vanished. This came after the fact clearly showed that substances declared as vaccines, never checked properly against COVID, do not actually protect people from getting sick. So the picture of coordination for changing of the definitions was painted completely. The temporary needed instruments were sharpened, and the results of usage are well known. The previous speakers gave a detailed picture of the upcoming treaty, but foremost mentioned pandemic agreement finally aims to become a system for completely electronic control of people in all WHO members under the fragile guise of healthcare. The WHO recently declined anticipation for new pandemics in advance. They are acting as predictors of last instance, when the disastrous level of the competence of their officers is obvious. Is it really need we to sign anything? I don't think so. For a better understanding, it should be emphasized once again that fear will always be the first choice for the WHO and its associated health authorities in different countries, because it is the only way to ensure that at least the majority of citizens will play along. It is time for countries to leave this organization, whose true aim is to trample of our human rights and freedoms. We in Bulgaria did the first step towards our exit from WHO. Bulgaria is the only country in the world where an organization called Bulgarian Alliance for Decent Life organized official nationwide signature action, support the exit of Republic of Bulgaria from WHO and for withdrawal from all agreements. We took over 30,000 signatures for only 16 working days and officially led Bulgarian National Assembly to undertake political action as the law says. Discussion and mandatory vote. Police officers and Bulgarian prosecutors were not eager to work for repression in Bulgaria from the first day of the pandemic, or rather supported silently and sometimes publicly as in their majority. This actually turned Bulgaria to be the island of freedom and peaceful resistance. We minimized the fate of mainstream media. The humiliation from the official government forces was minimal or none. We made them useless for the goals of WHO, especially the Ministry of Health. We humiliated them, put them in humiliation in front of society, and their sponsors thus led to deterioration of the reputation of WHO, European Medical Agency, because we exposed the results of the vaccines publicly, and unfortunately, the European Commission, because of the obvious but even disastrous results. I have to tell you that without freedom, there is no health. And this is my first word become something like narrative in Bulgaria. Our New Citizens initiative should mark the beginning of the end of WHO and similar to them, organizations with their attempts to regulate and rule our lives. And finally, achieve views of truth, trust and freedom in the society. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much. I would like to thank again the MEPs. We wouldn't be here if it wouldn't be for you. Thank you for listening to all of us. Thank you for all the work that you've been doing and all the encouragement. I would like to ask the international speakers to join the panel and give us their views.
So now we come to the last part, to the debate, where we have some international speakers, and I have the privilege to start with this last round. And again, I can't thank enough to the members of parliament who have made it possible for this presentation to take place, to this debate to take place, but who have also consistently, during the last 2.5, 3 years, hold up freedom and the fundamental rights and brought it all the time back into the debate of parliament and insisted that these questions were brought to the parliament. And so really thank you very much. And this is exactly the topic we are addressing here today, and also the response to the question why I personally support this European Citizens Initiative, being a Swiss citizen not being allowed to participate directly, but now I'm going to tell you why I do all I can to support this initiative. And there's a clear, simple answer. I would like to start with the words from Professor Mattias Desmet. He concluded by saying, it is so important that we speak out as long as we can still speak out, to encourage others to join us, and as well then to ultimately make others to join us as well. Now, here comes the democratic element into this arena. And this is all about informed consent, informed dissent. If we speak about fundamental changes in our constitution, fundamental changes that are relevant for our lives, then these changes on the perspective of a constitution shall never come into place and into effect with our consent. The procedure how this is going to be done is defined by each constitution. And taking now the wider look at WHO, I had the pleasure to present the changes a couple of times, but it took me maybe 10 presentations to realize how to really explain well and understand what is going on here. And I think it can be brought down in a simple manner. WHO is going to establish a classical totalitarian structure and wants to make sure that the value of the national constitutions become zero. And if you analyze well these international health regulations, you will find 5 elements that show that very clear. Number 1, there's a mechanism of self-empowerment that already exists today, but which will be enlarged to a horrible extent. It will be even more simple than until today for one person, the general director, to declare a public health emergency of international concern. I spare you with the details, but he can simply just say the word into the microphone. Second element, all what WHO will publish under the title of recommendations will become mandatory. I gladly stay at disposal to any media to prove that. There are still today many officials who say the opposite, who say, no, this will just be recommendations, not mandatory. That's not true. They will become mandatory. Number 3, fundamental rights. With such a regime where you have one person declaring emergency law, having all the power to make recommendations that are legally binding, you don't have to even discuss about human fundamental rights. And whether they are now still crossed out in Article 3 or whether they might put it back into, it will not change the result. There will be no effective protection on the country level for fundamental human rights. Number 4 is specifically frightening because as human beings and trying to pursue the ideals of the Enlightenment, as very well explained by Mattias Desmet, we depend on the right information. Now, in both of these instruments, in the new pandemic treaty and in the amended health regulations, we have both provisions that clearly say WHO shall be the only sole institution on the planet that will be allowed to define what is the truth in health matters, including censorship. And the 5th point is that there's no mechanism of correction. There's no mechanism of control vis-à-vis WHO that could correct any wrong recommendation or a wrongly declared public health emergency of international concern. No, they can just go on forever and forever. And all of this, of course, we know, it is done in the interest not of our health, but in the interest of those sponsors who define the true strategy behind it. Now, it doesn't take a study of law to come to the conclusion that this will heavily affect and reduce the ordinary structure of our constitutions actually to a minimum. There will be no separations of powers. There will be no checks and balances. This principle of the rule of law will be as abolished and replaced by the rule of emergencies. And most notably, there will be no human rights. Now, this is so powerful, and we have seen that this message has not come across to the public. And there has literally non-debate taking place in any parliament with very few exceptions. And I shall mention one exception is Andrew Bridgen, member of British Parliament, who rightfully persisted and insisted in bringing this topic to the floor of the House in the British Parliament. And he succeeded. And I'm honored that he is here with us today, Andrew Bridgen. And so does also Gerald Hauser. He did the same. He made the case in the Austrian Parliament that WHO's power structure should be made a topic of discussion. Now, I come to the point, it is all about how can we engage the parliaments? How can we engage the public? And this initiative of today is a very, very valid tool of starting public awareness, and starting public debate in an international level, on an international stage, and then continue with informing people. Because I am sure about one thing. Many people slept in the past, but if the same people would understand what is coming to them in the future, they would have an informed dissent. They would be horrified and would certainly not agree into this permanent power structure of WHO, Gavi, and of course also the European Commission is the little junior partner of WHO, is doing the same. So let's continue by informing our fellow citizens. And here I wanted to thank you again to the 7 European citizens that initiated this European Citizens Initiative, because I think it is a very powerful tool to initiate a public debate and to bring this where it has to be discussed to our parliaments. Thank you very much. And
we have a message from someone that you probably all know. So on the screen, joining us from the USA, we have Dr. Peter McCullough.
I'm Dr. Peter McCullough. I'm a practicing internist, cardiologist, and a research epidemiologist in Dallas, Texas, United States. I want to thank the members of the European Parliament for attending and hearing the concerns of the European Citizens Initiative. This group has come together because of concerns in Europe, those traveling to and from Europe and worldwide, regarding the World Health Organization Pandemic Treaty Alliance and all of its efforts to gain greater control and actually its aspiration of having dominion over all plants, animals, and humans in the world. The last 3 years, we've seen the COVID-19 pandemic disaster be far worsened by WHO actions. The World Health Organization was grossly unprepared. They intentionally deceived the world regarding the origins of SARS-CoV-2 from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, a project that was engineered by U.S. researchers, Ralph Barrick and his associates at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, Peter Daszak at the EcoHealth Alliance, and then, of course, the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Do you know that the WHO declined 3 independent U.S. scientists nominated by Rear Admiral Brett Giroir and chose Peter Daszak in 2020 to actually aid in the cover-up of the Wuhan lab as opposed to getting an independent evaluation back in 2020? The World Health Organization is simply not the organization that we want having any influence over our healthcare, over our animals or plants or our livestock. The WHO, as it exists, should only provide data analysis, in vitro diagnostics, and outbreak investigation, and provide reports to us. The WHO serves us, those of us who are member nations. But under no circumstance can the WHO seize more power, binding by international law, than ultimately carry out what would probably be a series of disastrous public health interventions, and particularly if we have another pandemic. If we have another pandemic, we want to focus on independent scientists aiding their governments, focusing on early treatment, and under no circumstances should anyone wait in lockdown and wait for a vaccine. The COVID-19 vaccine campaign has been a worldwide debacle. It's been grossly unsafe, completely ineffective, and we certainly don't want a repeat of that at the hands of the WHO. So please listen to the European Citizens Initiative, ECI. I'm in complete support, and I want to thank you for your diligence and your ability to sort through all this. This has been a difficult time for all of us, but hold strong, seek truth, and be bold and relentless in bringing the European Union and the world back to its senses, getting back to normal, and allowing everyone to pursue their goals of life, liberty, and happiness. I'm Dr. Peter McCullough from the United States, internist, cardiologist, and trained epidemiologist. Thank you for listening.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have been very lucky. We had some great speakers at this event so far, and to have Dr. Peter McCullough from the United States. He has been an absolute Trojan for the cause over the last few years, and he's been attacked in the media relentlessly. Like many of us, he's still standing, and he will be on the right side of history, as will you, I promise you. Now, let's correct a couple of things. I've had some brilliant briefings on the WHO from Philipp. Two of them in Norway, which was excellent. And yes, I would love to claim all the credit for the debate we had in our parliament on the WHO pandemic treaty, but that would not be right. We have a quirk in the UK parliament, the mother of all parliaments, that if 100,000 of our electors write in with a petition for a particular debate, then the government is duty bound to put on that debate. I'm pleased to say that we managed to achieve a petition total of 156,000 electors for the WHO debate, and so we had that debate, much to the government's chagrin. And of course, they said that there would be no handing over of sovereignty, there would be no giving away of powers, and we wouldn't be agreeing to any of this. Well, unfortunately, governments, as we know, do not always tell the truth. Ladies and gentlemen, some 7 years ago, I didn't think I'd be sitting here. I was leading the Leave campaign for the East Midlands to leave the European Union. And as you know, we were successful. However, I am delighted. I'm delighted to be back here. With my European friends, standing shoulder to shoulder on an issue of the most importance in our lives and those of our children. So I didn't expect to be here, but I think we can all say that over the last 3 years, a lot of things have happened in our lives that we didn't expect to happen. So desperate times lead to desperate measures. And the main point I want to make in my address to you today in the time that I've got available is that, and I want you to hear loud and clear, that the very concept of the democracy that we've taken for granted all of our lives is under threat as it never has been before. And it's not just in my country, it's not across Europe, it is across the whole of the world. It's not from external armies mounding up on our borders this time, but it is from the corruption and the decay of our own institutions who are allowing this to happen. I think every one of us who's elected and represents our people, we need to remember that we are always the servants of the people. We are not their masters. And some of my colleagues and some elected representatives around the world have forgotten this lesson. They will need to learn this lesson again. We are entrusted to represent our constituents and their best interests at all times. And when their rights are threatened, we are duty bound to defend them. Again, many of my colleagues seem to have forgotten that, and the turnout even for the WHO debate in our parliament was very, very disappointing. So, the global pandemic treaty is such a threat to our sovereignty, looming ominously on the horizon, together with the amendments to the international health regulations, which will fundamentally, if they're passed through our parliaments, alter the relationship between the citizens and the state. The WHO would paint an illusion of nation states coming together to fight deadly pathogens, when it's really, as we've already heard, a power grab by an unaccountable elite, rather keen to reinforce the power shift that has already happened in the global pandemic response to COVID-19. The recommendations made during COVID-19 by the WHO were advisory, and they now want them to become mandatory. I mean, let's face it, the WHO did not exactly cover themselves with glory with their recommendations during the COVID-19 pandemic. It was a litany of disaster, a disaster which the WHO were not even keen to look into. They've had no review of their performance and their recommendations during the recent COVID-19 pandemic. So confident are they that their ideas and their advice was absolutely perfect. So there can be no doubt that if we fail to learn the mistakes of history, certainly that as far as the WHO are concerned, they are doomed to repeat them. So the World Health Organization is an unelected, diplomatically immune, tax-exempt group that bears no resemblance to the good faith Florence Nightingale Union of Nations set up over 75 years ago. Public health and the decisions surrounding it now exist as a monopoly of the WHO, headed up by bureaucrats in Geneva, whose leadership has been embroiled in scandal after scandal. And the majority of the influence on the WHO now is by external entities. And indeed, as has been mentioned, one of the richest men in the world has a massive influence over the WHO. Indeed, I think 84% of all the funding of the WHO now is by external commercial sources with an ability to direct the area that your generous donations to the WHO will send their policies. So it's basically pay to play. If you have enough money, you can influence the WHO. Not exactly the people I'd like to be deciding in the future whether my constituents are locked into their houses, whether they can see their relatives, if they have to wear masks, and if they have to take mandatory medication. I would say the least qualified people in the world to make those decisions. And any parliament that decides to abdicate its responsibilities to its constituents does not deserve the name of being a parliament and does not deserve a seat in any elected assembly. We have no right to relinquish our sovereignty, the sovereignty of our nations, because it's not mine to give away. It's not any of us to give away. Sovereignty always belongs to the people, and every election should be returned back to the people, where they will again decide who they allow to represent them for the next parliamentary period. Forests can be grown for 1,000 years, but could be chopped down in a few weeks, and the same is with our democracy. I've actually been shocked, and I think people in the UK have come to take our democracy and freedoms as a right, an entitlement, that's something that would never be taken away. But I'm equally shocked that those in Europe who have suffered under tyranny in living memory would again perhaps acquiesce to that position again without resistance. So I don't think I'm being dramatic when I say that the Global Pandemic Treaty and the amendments to the International Health Regulations will allow the WHO to declare a public health emergency of international concern, a FAKE, abbreviated to, and not only when to call it, but how long it would last and when it would be over. And I suspect that it would be a very long time before we had democracy returned to our independent parliaments. I call on every elected representative around the world to resist these WHO power grabs. It would be a dereliction of our democratic duty that we have to our electorates. There's no way that we should be signing away sovereignty without the agreement of the people, and that would take a referendum in each country to hand over those sort of powers, and I would settle for nothing less. I will end with a quote from America, which I think, since we've had Dr. McCullough on, I think is quite apt. It said that when the people are scared of the politicians, that is tyranny. But when the politicians are scared of the people, that's democracy. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to get to the latter, and we need to get there quickly. We're in dangerous times.
I'm actually wondering if I'm on the right panel now. As I look side to side, I feel a tad out of my depth. Before I crack on, I'd like to actually thank some other people in the room, and that is Oracle Films and Grit Media, who are live streaming for us today. Now, this live stream is going very well, and I just want to give those guys a round of applause for all the hard work they do. I am delighted to have the opportunity to speak here today. So firstly, thank you to the members of the European Parliament for welcoming us, and thank you to the citizens for your determination and perseverance, and for being the reason that we're all here today. My name is Fiona Hine, and I'm a campaigner and activist from the United Kingdom. I've dedicated the last 3 years of my life to the fight for truth, justice, and freedom. I'm going to warn you, I'm probably worse than you, Vicky, so I get a tad emotional as well. Yeah. Thank you. I never thought that I'd have the privilege to be speaking here today, and I'm honoured to be speaking alongside some of the strongest dissenting voices we have seen in the past 3 years. I'm also delighted to be here next to British MP Mr. Andrew Bridgen, who I've had the pleasure of working with, who's spoken at my rallies, and he is the only MP in the UK Parliament that's brave enough to stand with the people. I have a question, though. Are you scared of me?
I would never admit it if I was.
Exactly. I'll talk about a few things that all of you know. But from 2020, for 2 years, we all suffered draconian measures based on unscientific and fictional modelling. These measures were enforced by a tyrannical government that repeatedly claimed to be following the science. I think we can all agree they did not. They created a science designed to fit a narrative, while these unscientific measures, restrictions, and mandates were forced upon us. During this time, it was not easy to be a dissenting voice. Most of us were censored, silenced, and cancelled, but some of us were arrested, charged, and convicted for exercising our human right to peacefully protest against these cruel and harmful measures. We were isolated, terrorised, and oppressed, and this was their new normal. While dissenting voices were silenced and ridiculed, and people who peacefully demonstrated were criminalised, the masses were coerced and manipulated through the use of behavioural science, fear-mongering, and wartime propaganda. They were forced into taking an experimental vaccine, and this is their new normal. Most recently, I have run a 6-month-long campaign that gave a voice to the COVID vaccine injured and bereaved. Oh, sorry. Sorry. Thank you. So most recently, I've run a campaign for the COVID vaccine injured and bereaved. 2 of those ladies are in the room with us today, one who lost her mother and the other who's injured herself, who campaigned for truth and justice, not just for themselves, but for future vaccine injured, and we know that will come. I've campaigned for 2 years telling people that it would be safer to wait, that to discourage them from needlessly participating in an experiment. Unfortunately, today we see the results of a mass vaccination campaign rolled out globally with no informed consent. They mandated an experimental vaccine. They threatened people with the loss of their livelihoods. And now thousands of people in the UK alone have suffered life-changing injury, while others have been killed. This is their new normal. Our rights and freedoms were stripped from us in a way that we have never experienced before. The very people we may have once believed were democratically elected into their positions of privilege to govern by the people, for the people, committed fraud upon the people. I believe that today this fraud has been exposed. As Orwell said, all tyrannies rule through fraud and force, but once the fraud is exposed, they must rely exclusively on force. This power grab, as we know it, if we do not resist, will be that force, and that force will be our new normal. I stand with you today to congratulate these citizens for taking the first steps to tackle the transfer of power from the people to the unelected and unaccountable World Health Organization. Secondly, I'll call upon the citizens of the world to unite in their respective countries, as we will do in ours, and across all continents of the world, and to tell those citizens that you do have a choice. You have the power to effect change, and you have a voice, so use it. Now we must work together to stand against this power grab, and at the very least, raise mass awareness, encourage and demonstrate mass non-compliance. You have a choice not to choose their new normal. Thank you. Okay, again, all being well, we do have another message from financial analyst, I believe, Mr. David E. Martin, again from the USA.
I am delighted to thank the members of the European Union Parliament, all of the people who have been calling for justice across Europe, and most importantly, the ECI, coming together at this very important time to make sure that we take a step forward for humanity in the face of something that we need to put in a historical context. Most of you forget, but in 2000, in August of 2000, the United States Food and Drug Administration approved Bayer's ciprofloxacin drug for inhalation anthrax, a full year before anthrax was released by the Department of Defense in the United States, ultimately harming and killing people and creating a demand for a drug that 1 year earlier had been approved for a condition that had never been seen on Earth. We had not had inhalation anthrax, but the FDA approved it a year in advance. And 4 years later, 4 years after the US Department of Defense released anthrax into the US population, we passed the PrEP Act, which was the suspension of civil liberties and the suspension of constitutional rights in the United States in the case of a declared pandemic or an emergency authorization. Please, Europeans, please, global citizens, listen carefully to what I'm saying. The reason why we unleashed this thing called coronavirus was so that we could get to a place where the public would be willing to accept the suspension of civil liberties. As clearly articulated in the Charter of Fundamental Rights for the European Union, Article 3, Section 2A, we know that there is a requirement in Europe that says that under the preservation of bodily integrity, every person has the right to full informed consent. This born, ladies and gentlemen, out of the Nuremberg proceedings in 1945, this critical condition, which is a fundamental human right, is now being sought to be vacated by the same power grab that was done between 2001 and 2005 in the United States. Let me be abundantly clear. The ECI initiative is so critical because had US citizens stood up in 2002, 3, and 4, we would have been able to block the conditions that gave rise to the current pandemic. There would have been no emergency use. There would have been no compulsory medical countermeasure, and there would have been no reason for a pandemic to unleash terror across the population had we taken our voices seriously then. This is now your time. Stand with your members of parliament, stand with your fellow citizens, and make it abundantly clear that the World Health Organization will not have the authority to create the suspension of fundamental human rights now or ever, because the moment they take that power in their hands, they will abuse it, no different from what we saw after the PrEP Act. We had this experience before. Our job is to learn from that experience and make it abundantly clear that as Bayer was the profiteer in 2001, and as Pfizer is the profiteer in 2022 and 2023, we cannot allow our rights to be suspended so that individual corporations and the governments that they patronize can be enriched at the expense of liberty. Stand together with me and with all of your colleagues and make it abundantly clear that this time We will not give a single ounce of effort against anything other than the total and 100% preservation of liberty. That is our cause. That is why we're here. And that is why I am honored to stand with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Fiona. Hello. My name is Gerald Hauser. I am a member of the Austrian Parliament and I represent the Freedom Party of Austria, the FPÖ. Together with Dr. Hannes Strasser, I wrote 2 bestsellers concerning the treatment of corona and the terrible corona policy in Austria. In Austria, we, the FPÖ, are the only party that challenged the corona policy of our government. For 3 years, we have argued that early medical treatment of corona patients, our Plan B, would have been a better approach. We have said no to inhuman restrictions and no to experimental vaccination for the entire population. However, all other parties of the Austrian parliament have focused solely on vaccination. They have totally ignored the principle of informed consent. This is a no-go for us. On the basis of discrimination, with social pressure, and with disinformation, millions of Austrians were pushed into this risky vaccination program. The principle of informed consent and the right to the integrity of the individual was ignored. Currently, 2 significant legal projects are being prepared by the World Health Organization. The first is the Pandemic Treaty, and the second involves changes to the international health regulations. They will affect our constitution and our democracy profoundly. With these 2 legal instruments, as they call it, informed consent will begin. Whenever World Health Organization wishes to promote medical substances, there will be no right to the integrity of the individual. We are the only party discussing these issues which have never been debated in the national parliament. In addition, in the Austrian parliament, a motion was passed to gather digital health data from us. Again, the FPÖ was the only party that voted against this motion. This data will be shared with the European Health Database and may eventually be used worldwide. The European Union has a global plan to use this data across the world. They are collaborating with the World Health Organization. They are also about to establish the global digital health certificate. The worst-case scenario will be to introduce a mandatory vaccination. The European Citizens Initiative that is presented now is the first important step to say no. No to the violation of the integrity of the individual. Therefore, I would like to thank our 7 European citizens who today presented their European Citizen Initiative. We must send out a very strong signal to the world to protect ourselves and our liberties. Let's sign this initiative. Many thanks to all.
Thank you for having me. My name is Nathaniel Pawlowski from Canada. I'm going to speak about the consequences of abuse of power under the guise of health, set out by the WHO framework that local governments take upon themselves to implement. I'm the son of Pastor Artur Pawlowski, who you will hear in just a minute. I am here today in desperation, a cry for help. I would like to stand here and tell you all the things about freedom and democracy that I like, but I no longer know those things. They have been taken away from us Canadians. Canada has fallen. We no longer have freedom of religion or freedom of speech or the right to protest or assemble or associate or express ourselves or have free media or disagree with the government. Anyone who does so is arrested, charged, and jailed as political dissidents. My father was just found guilty of inciting mischief for giving a sermon to the truckers when they went and stood for our rights in 2022. A Christian sermon that referenced the solidarity movement was criminal in our government's eyes. A charge that has a penalty of up to 10 years in prison. This case sets a precedent to all Canadians and the world if you allow this to happen, that anybody, including politicians and media, do not have the freedom to say or express what they have on their hearts for fear that what they say is mischief and could be liable to prison. I myself have been charged for preaching and reading the Bible publicly because the government claims the Bible isn't inclusive and is hateful. This is what the Canadian government is doing to us. In my father's case, the Crown prosecutor, and I believe in naming names because our oppressors do not get to get away with this without being named and shamed. So the Crown prosecutor, Stephen Johnston, and Judge Gordon Crink claimed that when Pastor Artur, my father, referenced the solidarity movement in his 19-minute sermon, it was an act of mischief against the government. The very solidarity movement that this parliament reveres and has placards about all over the building. The peaceful movement that broke the Iron Curtain and repelled the communist hold on Europe. The movement the Canadian government condemns and says is unacceptable. So I ask you, the rest of the free world, to intercede on Canada's behalf and pressure the Canadian tyrants to stop persecuting law-abiding free Canadians, especially clergy. They simply did their duty and gave hope. My father told the truckers to stand for their rights, solidarity style, and to do so peacefully. His sentencing is this August 9th, 2023, and if he goes down, we are all lost as Canadians. If a pastor goes to prison, what can they do to the rest of us? For giving a sermon in Canada, they are no better than the tyrants of old. So please, I ask you for help and to pressure Canada on this matter and to help us deal with our oppressors who act like modern-day Caligulas. Trudeau is a modern-day Caligula. We cannot allow these mad emperors to run mad. And remember, all of this is being done under the guise of health, safety, and protecting us. By stripping our rights and ushering in tyranny, we must not allow Canada to treat its citizens, and especially clergy, this way. The WHO has structured a way to take away our rights, and our local governments are doing that. Now you will hear my father. He will speak via video. So this is Pastor Artur Pawlowski, political prisoner.
I am Artur Pawlowski, born behind the Iron Curtain in Poland, crushed by the iron fist of oppression.
The armed forces now rule in Poland with martial law and the threat of execution for those who break it.
The horrors inflicted by unchecked despotism have burned their mark into my memory. The December of 1981, when martial law turned our cities into shadows. The biting winters when the quest for bread met with empty shelves. The silenced voices of cutting forest. These memories led me to vow Never again. Never again would I bow to tyranny. Never again would I let freedom's voice be muffled. This promise guided me to Canada, a beacon of liberty. You can keep it. I have a court order that says your actions are illegal. Back off, respect my rights. Freedom is more than a word. It's a measure of our humanity, courage, and determination. It's a cost borne by soldiers, journalists, and volunteers. We are providing necessity. When the shadow of tyranny found me again, denying me the right to serve the needy, disregarding its own rules, I remembered, never again.
After receiving new enforcement powers for public gatherings Thursday, Calgary police have arrested Artur and David Pawlowski.
Get out of this property. Immediately get out.
Premier of Alberta right now declared the protesting is illegal. So when I opened my church in the protest against the government overreach, I spent 3 days in jail for my crime of opening the church in a free and democratic society.
Like a soldier, I've tasted the bitter price of freedom, endured the cold handcuffs and harsh judgment. The soldier stands unflinching, knowing that freedom bears a cost. There is a price to pay. Like a journalist, I've dared to speak truth to power. My voice, not ink, reverberates through Calgary and beyond, fulfilling the duty of free speech. Like a volunteer, I've served my community with deeds, not mere words, knowing that true freedom lies in service to others. St. Augustine, a pillar of our Christian faith, said, hope has two beautiful daughters, anger and courage. Anger at the status quo, and courage to change it. From my house arrest, I pose this question to you, honorable members of the European Parliament. How many nights in cold cell would you endure for freedom? What lengths would you traverse to defend your people's rights? You see, I have spent 50 nights in jail standing up for our right to gather and worship. It's time to rise, to say never again, to face the lingering shadows of the 20th century, to challenge the injustice of today. It's in your best interest for people like me to survive. Because when we go down, be sure of it, you will be next.
I'm Nick Hudson, chairman of an organization called pandata.org, affectionately known as Panda. It was set up to push back against the travesties of the lockdowns in early 2020 and the general hysteria of the COVID phenomenon. Thank you to the MPs for organizing this. It's a pleasure to be back here. The inane banner, "Nobody is safe until everyone is safe," is doing much harm. Your money is being stolen for the benefit of corrupt companies and their stakeholders, and your freedom and the freedom of your children is being stolen by the effort to centralize this corruption at a global level. I come from Africa, and it suffers the most extreme example of how this fraud is being perpetrated. Africa has many problems. With a median life expectancy just above 60, clearly some of these problems relate to health. But the unrelenting obsession with viral diseases represents a scandalous misallocation of resources. Africa doesn't have lower life expectancy because
of viruses. It has lower life expectancy because of poverty and malnutrition. Healthcare workers in Africa are so thinly spread that the average one is responsible for the care of thousands of people. Yet under the COVAX initiative, the African CDC has estimated that tens of billions of dollars needed to be spent vaccinating Africans against COVID. As my colleague Dr. David Bell points out, that wall of money ought to be viewed in the context of the World Health Organization's entire annual budget of $3 billion and the Global Fund's aggregate annual global expenditure on malaria, tuberculosis, and HIV of about $4 billion. The wild lunacy of that ambition is even more vivid when we consider that most Africans have long been immune to COVID owing to prior exposure, and that only a tiny minority of them were at risk in the first place, owing to the very small portion of people in the older age groups in Africa. Trying to pass this madness off as some kind of equity simply won't cut it. And it is a very clear reflection of the sinister turn towards one-size-fits-all policies that the COVID policy response has exemplified, and which constructs such as One Health, global coordination in the name of pandemic preparedness, the WHO treaty, and most importantly, the international health regulation amendments are being weaponized. Before this peak vaccine sycophancy, we had the lockdowns. They were ineffective. They were contradicted by all preceding guidelines, and they were implemented without any sign of a cost-benefit analysis. Even if they worked in developed nations, and most surely they did not, in Africa, they were completely impractical. Attempts to implement them caused immense economic damage. Millions of people were hurled into grinding poverty. Entire cohorts of children had their educational prospects destroyed with absolutely no hope of recovery. The adage that lockdowns were a matter of lives versus the economy was always a completely silly one. Economies mediate life. Yet even as the WHO seeks to enlarge massively its powers and control in purported pandemic situations, it shows no sign whatsoever of acknowledging that the globally centralized responses of lockdowns and vaccination programs not only failed, but represented staggering misappropriation of resources. And make no mistake, it is your money that is being misappropriated, whether by direct taxes or the indirect ones from the implementation of so-called modern monetary theory. You are paying. Instead, the WHO shows every sign of wanting to do more of these programs. This is very clearly demonstrated by its obsession with vaccine passports and the central role that vaccines play in the One Health initiative. None of this is very far adrift from the commercial and political objectives of the so-called stakeholders who have infiltrated the WHO at every level in a coordinated effort of many years. We do well to take a step back from the narrow confine of pandemics to survey the broader context of our times. Pandemic preparedness is far from being the only agenda that drives towards centralization. I have a little rule of thumb for diagnosing a centralization scam. If we can detect 1, a propagandized global crisis, 2, admitting only global solutions, and 3, with dissenting voices viciously silenced, then we know with absolute certainty that we are dealing with a scam. And anyone who has been watching events of recent years with even a modicum of attention will be aware that multiple agendas tick these 3 boxes right now, not just the COVID agenda. The architects of such globalist trajectories, all the Kissingers, Rockefellers, Schwabs, Carneys, Strongs, Carstens, Bangas, are held out as great intellects, but they are nothing of the sort. We know, both in theory and in practice, that centralization causes nothing but misery because it destroys the mechanisms of error correction, leading to doubling down on flawed policies. And it cannot do otherwise, especially not in the highly centralized institutions that have been captured by these hubristic people. History is replete with examples of tyrants enamored of their centralizing visions, believing each time that they hold some perspective or some asset that their predecessors lacked. Today, it is the false belief that access to more data and bigger computers will mean that this time is different. But it isn't different. People still make mistakes, and when those who amass great power and control do so, the results are disastrous. Africans have found out the hard way how much centralized mistakes hurt, and they will mount a fight against this reiteration of colonialism. But citizens of all nations need to commit to fighting this tendency towards centralization at all levels and in all places. The entirety of our well-beings and freedoms is at stake. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I think we were going to have a Q&A, but I think we might go to the closing because we're rather tight on time. But I just wanted to make a final comment. We've had people travel from all over Europe to be here today. We've had a group come from Ireland, a group come from the UK. I know people from all over Europe have traveled to support you. Now, Nick's come all the way from South Africa just for this event, and we have Nathaniel that's come all the way from Canada. So can we please give a round of applause to the people that have traveled so far to be here today? And just lastly, before I wrap up and hand over to Mr. Kolakušić, I think the World Health Organization and those tyrannical dictators should be extremely worried about the people that we have together today in this room. For someone who has been waiting for someone like Andrew Bridgen to speak out in our own parliament and to be sat next to him and to be with MEPs, Christine, you're a hero. And you don't mince your words, and I think they should be very, very scared. So before we leave the podium, I do have one final request, because I do like things going viral, for want of a better word. But since I'm in charge of social media, would it be able to get the panelists and speakers all onto the podium, in front of the podium, and take a picture with all these global minds together today, citizens and professionals alike? Yes? Thank you. Can we just get one, if you can pop your camera down, we can just get one in. Just one more, folks, and then... Thank you.
Hello, do you hear me? My name is Michael Saba from United People Foundation. I just want to mention we need solutions, and we try to present with United People Foundation a solution to the problems we face with the people. So we develop, implement and promote innovative products and services from, for and by the people. This is our motto, the good stewardship of all life. And as a small step, we developed a financial system that is parallel to the existing fiat currencies, just like we have one in Switzerland, you know, the Vir. Not many people know that, but this is a currency next to the existing Swiss franc, already 89 years. So this is a small step we present to the people of the world, from, for and by the people, to join that, perhaps that financial platform which can liberate us from the globalists who control all the finances in the world. Thank you for your attention.
Sorry, you
There we go. Thank you for that. In regards to what you're saying, I think all of us, we agreed when we were approaching the subject of ECI that we wanted to include issues with the cash. I think we all are aware that the cash is being threatened, and we don't know exactly how soon this direction will be taken. At the moment, we did not include it because we are aware that the ECI is bound by specific rules that the European Commission has. But I think, yes, in the future, all of us, if we go forward, have to look into the issue of the cash.
Can I, Justyna? I would like to add just a few words. What I know, Slovakian parliament put the right to have a cash in the constitution, and when I wrote my plan 1 year ago, which is called Czech Republic on the first place, which is having some steps, this is one of the conditions. I think this is what we should push on, that the part of our constitutions will be the right to have cash and to make all the operation with cash.
Any solutions, as you ask, should come from us. So it's just the beginning. Together with the members of parliament, I think we have to find out the solutions. So when once an initiatives run, then the solutions will come. And the last one I have to say, this is the 20 Bulgarian sleva. Now our puppet government trying to taking out this slev from using it. And you know what? We have a referendum made with over 600,000 Bulgarian citizens signed down. The law said that the parliament must give us the date for referendum. They are running away from the commissions, and they do not want to put this proposition for decision to be voted inside. That's it. That's what. So the solutions will come with work. As French people are saying, the appetite comes with eating.
Yes, I think in the green shirt. Yeah, sorry. And then the gentleman in the green shirt, and then the one that just stood up, if we could have.
Hello. I speak French, sorry. Je pense que ça va être traduit après. Je pense ici que nous assistons à un génocide de masse et une stérilisation chimique mondiale. Ces gens sont des psychopathes et nous devons les arrêter. Et je suis très content qu'ici, il y a des députés européens qui sont vraiment pour le peuple et par le peuple. On doit vous soutenir absolument, et on doit soutenir aussi tous les médias indépendants qui donnent la parole au peuple et qui donnent la parole aux gens qui ont la vérité. Ce que j'appelle à la Commission européenne, c'est de faire une série d'autopsies et de commissions sur différents sujets. Sur les 300 laboratoires à virus qui sont dans le monde, sur les autopsies qu'il y a à faire sur tous les morts suite à la vaccination, le trafic d'armes qui a été fait par l'Europe, les SMS qui n'ont toujours pas été dévoilés par von der Leyen, la fraude des élections, tout ça, c'est des choses qu'il faut absolument que le public sache. Il faut aussi que la Commission européenne subsidie les médias alternatifs, parce que les médias de mainstream sont à la botte de la finance. Il y a d'autres façons d'arrêter ce massacre. En 1999, la Commission européenne a mis une motion de censure pour simplement une personne qui avait fraudé, qui avait un emploi fictif. Ici, nous sommes devant des millions de morts. Moi, je demande que le Parlement européen fasse une motion de censure avec l'article 119 et 234 pour destituer toute la Commission européenne ici à Bruxelles. La peur doit changer de camp. Elle doit absolument changer de camp. Il serait important de mettre l'adresse et le nom de chaque personne qui participe à ce génocide sur le net et en présence de l'Europe.
Monsieur?
Je suis gilet jaune, j'ai déjà fait pas mal de jours de prison aussi pour simplement m'être exprimé. Je vous remercie à tous.
Okay, Monsieur, thank you for your comment. It's very important that, of course, independent media, we all join forces. I will not answer now in French because my school French is too bad. I understood your core message. The thing is only that it is now for now, if you would, and the others who have questions in their minds, would respect that we would love to answer questions regarding the ECI. And because this is now not a public forum that we would love to have more often in the future, where people can bring in their questions, can bring in their initiatives. But for now, as we are running short in time, we would kindly ask you to, if you have a question to the ECI per se, ask those to us. Thank you.
Je vous remercie pour votre travail. Merci.
Thank you. Sorry, the gentleman in front.
My name is Olivier Chassaigne. I'm just a citizen of Europe. It's high time that we coalesce all forces for one important step next year, which is the European elections, the European Parliament elections in June next year. It's high time that we coalesce all forces. We have to take contact each other so that we form the resistance. They play on the fragmentation of the dissidents. We should have only one dissident, one resistance. And we are the resistance. My question is simple to you. Are you ready to join forces?
We're going to ask Ladoslav to answer. You want to answer? Okay. He says no. Okay. There we go. Vicky, here we go.
Yes, of course, we are ready to join forces because that's what we've been doing from the past almost 3 years. Myself and all these citizens, we've been in Fiona as well. We've been the resilience and resistance people that, though we don't look like it, but myself, I took thousands of people to the streets in Portugal. But the problem is, like in any other countries, is that the people, the majority of the people, that they are very worried to who is doing the good work. And then when they say, well, we are resistance, they are not. They become our own control opposition, and that has to end. Otherwise, the other side always win. So we have to realize there's always people that are going to be leading, and the other ones that are going to be follow the leaders. And until the people do not realize there's people with energy and the willingness to take the truth forward, these people, they cannot be saying they are resistance because they are fighting against their own rights and freedom. Thank you very much.
Can I add something to that?
I think
Okay. Yes, I think the challenge we are facing is that we should become a group without becoming a mass ourselves. And a mass and a group are two things that are completely different. In a mass, everyone identifies and has to identify with a common ideal image. That's a characteristic of a mass. Everyone identifies with the same ideal image. And in a group, a fruitful group, a group that is constitutive for a human being, the one and only thing that unites the group is that everyone is encouraged to have his own opinion and to articulate his own opinion, and differences are encouraged between people. Differences between people, differences in opinion, or even the reason why people love each other, because if you only love the other to the extent that he is similar to you, you love yourself and not the other. So, what I think that everything will depend on the degree to which we learn to cultivate and to practice the art of sincere speech, because it's sincere speech, resonating speech, that really connects people to each other, from an individual to an individual, and that really constitute a group that does not become a mass. Because if we become a mass, we destroy ourselves. We will become aggressive, and we will Be opposed to the other mass, the large mass, and you will be destroyed, inevitably.
I think if there's one more question, then please. So two, because the gentleman was holding a hand behind you.
Okay, one short question. My name is Rolf Karpenstein. My father worked for more than 30 years here in the Commission, so I grew up here in Brussels, know quite well, also worked for the legal service for 10 years. So my question is very simple. Is there any critical movement also within the Commission? I have one friend in the Commission. He is like me, critical on everything, understood everything. He says they're all asleep and following.
I think this isn't a question for us. It will be more to the MEPs, so maybe one of the MEPs can answer that.
Yes, if I could. There actually is, believe it or not. And this happened when we had our very first press conference, which was in September of 21, I think. We received lots of emails from the staff from EU Commission. And, well, I don't want to say too much, but it was very helpful having these contacts because there were so many things that we had not even been aware of, and we were never supposed to be aware of any of this. We were made aware of, and that pretty much enabled us to take yet another step and the next step. So yes, there is. Unfortunately, it's obviously not among the level of the commissioners, but among the staff. Oh yes, there is lots of support. Yes.
Only a very short comment from my side. I want to take up a word from which I have learned from Philipp Kruse, and I think it's very important. We should, from this day on, now be all ambassadors of the idea we have just been discussing today. It's our duty to spread the word, and we need to address this to all the people in the parliaments all over Europe. I think it's very important that we create this critical group, people who are able and want to discuss this topic from now on. This is our duty, and we will start it today.
One last question, thank you, and then we will finish.
Greetings, colleagues. My name is Ralph Atrash. I'm a trainee in the Director General of Finance in the European Parliament. I don't represent the DG, I represent myself. And just it's funny how the leftists and the communists and socialists always accuse the right of being the tyrants and the fascists, but at the end, when they censor free will, it just no one bats an eye. And by the way, Pastor, I just understand you and I feel you because I'm a Lebanese Christian from the East, and you haven't seen how in Syria and Iraq they burn Christians alive, they crucify them for not accepting the Muslim faith. Today, it's not Europe, it's not the case in Europe. But it will happen in Europe if you don't stop, if you don't take any measures against immigration. I want to live in a France that speaks French and drink wine, not in a halal eating France, and not the Islamic Republic in France. Thank you.
So we hear you, we understand you. And I think what is really important with all the stories and pointing out again to Pastor Pawlowski, and we have this international group of lawyers that said that they will be in contact with Pastor Artur Pawlowski and help as best as they can, and we will globally raise more and more awareness. It's tragic what we hear from your country, but also, again, we want to point out that in this critical time, as we already heard, we are all ambassadors for this idea. And I think from now on, we need to, and Christina Anderson said that, you cannot comply your way out of tyranny. And we know that in the EU Commission, here in this Parliament, in the hospitals, wherever, in the supermarkets, there are employees, there are people working there who think the same, but who were just not brave enough till now to show their faces. And now is the time, if we really reach this critical percentage where we are as a group that respects each other, spread the word, people will be brave enough to speak up themselves.
Thank you.
I think we can increase our power in two ways: by a growing number and by a better quality of our own voice. That's two ways. And the one option, we cannot be sure that our number will increase, but we can make sure that we talk in a more powerful, a more pure, and an ever more sincere way, I think. So I think we should realize that we don't need too many people to make the system change. We don't need too many people. We need a pure, resonating, pure and sincere speech. So we have it in our own hands.
I want to say something about fear and bravery. It's because I am afraid of losing my freedom and my human rights that I fight. It's because I'm afraid of do not be able to choose my health decisions and my children and my grandchildren. It's because I'm afraid that I have the courage. So to be afraid, it's okay. As long you deal with this fear, to become a freedom fighter and do not bend towards the power, the people that think they own the power. But I want to tell you and everyone, we are much more in numbers than the ones that think they own the world. That's why I'm here with no fear when people ask me, how come you have the courage? I don't. I have afraid. Thank you very much.
And I want to finish for myself this afternoon. I want to tell you that every long way, starting with the first small step, and finish with Nikos Kazantzakis' words, I don't want anything, I don't hope for anything. I'm free.
Okay, I was asked to answer the question, I didn't, but I have something to add. When I started to be activist 20 years ago, but when I started in this kind of field, I wrote a plan. And I said to people that it's not the group of people who is the powerful. Because if we have a powerful group of people, they always send an agents, the media are always shaming us, and they are always destroying the group. So it's not about the group, it's about the thought. This is why I wrote the thoughts, the plan, and I said to all the people that we have to stand behind the thoughts, behind the minds. This is what is the power. And one more thing, between me sitting in the bed when I said, let's do demonstration, and the guy who is standing on the stage with honorable members, for example, Christine Anderson and others, and in front 100,000 people, it's just the courage to stand behind the thoughts. And I think this is the power what we have, stand behind the thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And once again, thank you for the MEPs that they gave us this opportunity to be here. And hopefully this will now spread with the hashtag Trust and Freedom. And we know we're already seeing people contacting us via our website and through the media. So really, we would really appreciate for everybody to share that and spread that information about the ECI and what happened here today. Thank you.